Hey friends, today I want to talk favorite books. So I had a survey going for a while asking you guys what your favorite books were. And I didn't want to be completely torturous and only let you pick one book. So I said if you couldn't pick just one book to tell me your favorite two books. Your top two favorite books, fiction. And now I want to share the results. There was quite a few entries. You guys shared a lot of different books, but I went through and I picked the ones that were repeated the most, and I came up with the top 15 of your guys' favorite books. So we're going to start from the bottom, work our way to the top spot. Let me just say I have read most of the books on here, and most of them I have liked. Some of them I have not. So I'll talk about that as we go along here. In the final spot number 15, is A Voice in the Wind. And I believe this is the Mark of the Lion series. I'm not sure if it's a trilogy or a series by Francine Rivers. This one does not surprise me that it is on here. This, I believe, is a biblical fiction series, and it is probably one of the most recommended to me books, and I still have not read it. Yeah, so maybe I should get on that because that ended up on this list. So I actually don't even know offhand who it all follows, but I'm pretty sure it is a biblical fiction series. And yeah, like I said, you guys have been raving about it, so I should probably put that on my TBR sometime soon. And then, kind of like going in that vein, the next one in spot number 14 is Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. How she ended up on this list twice, and like two books right next to each other is kind of funny. So this is also biblical fiction, but like there's a lot of liberties taken with this. So this is supposed to be the story of Hosea and Gomer from the Bible, except that you take that general story and you put it into California's gold country in 1850, and then you've got Redeeming Love. This one I do know because I know I read this back in high school, and so it's been like 20 years since I read it probably. I would like to reread it. Hosea ends up marrying a prostitute in the Bible, and the prostitute kind of keeps going back, and it's supposed to be how us as God's children keep going back to our old loves instead of following the one true love. So I read this in high school, and I don't really remember what I thought of it. Like, California's gold country, 1850, that's not my general favorite setting, but because it's like based off of a biblical story, I'm curious. I would like to try reading this again and let you guys know what I think now. Moving along, in spot number 13 is Persuasion by Jane Austen. This actually is a bind-up of Pride and Prejudice, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion, and Emma. So, Persuasion. This is one of the few Jane Austen stories I have not read. I have read most of them, I think, but I know nothing about Persuasion. Once again, it ended up on this list, so I should probably give it a try. I know July is supposed to be Jane Austen July, so maybe next year for that month I will try to read one or two of her works or something. Okay, coming in at number 12, we are like going a completely different route here now, is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I was very surprised to see this book on the list. I don't remember who I had heard talking about this book, but there were a few things where I was just like, oh, I don't think I'm interested in it. It has been talked about a lot on BookTube, so originally I was kind of interested, but then someone said something and I was like, oh, maybe that's not really my kind of book. But now that it ended up on this list, I think I pretty much just have to read every book that has ended up on here that I haven't read. Those might have to end up on my like books I have to read in 2022. Next up is a book that I don't own, but I have read, and that is Jane Eyre, written by, is that one Charlotte Bronte? Maybe. Yeah, so Jane Eyre. It's a story about, she's supposed to be a governess, and she goes to live at this place, and she kind of falls in love with the man. I don't know how I feel about Jane Eyre. I feel like you either really love it or you really don't. And I think I'm more on the don't fence. But I was also reading it at a time when I hadn't read a ton of classics, so I'd almost be tempted to reread that one. I do like what I have read of the Bronte writings other than that, so it's probably another one I should give another chance and give that one a try. Next up is, okay, this is one of my favorites, and I know a lot of you have read this because of me. Let me just drop the book here. And that is If I Run, and this entire trilogy. The entire trilogy like takes place in a very short time period, and it like book two starts right where book one ends, so it's pretty much just like one long book. This is a Christian suspense story about a girl named Casey who is framed for the murder of her best friend. Right in the beginning, she walks in and sees that he's been murdered, and she knows she's going to get blamed for it, and I think, if I remember, she kind of knows who did it, but so she goes on the run and tries to solve the mystery before they can catch her. Yeah, and it's a lot of like disguises and different things. I really like this. This was a really fast series for me to read and a really thrilling one. Next up, this one is not surprising. What spot are we in here now? 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. Spot number 9. I'm actually surprised maybe that it wasn't higher up. That is Harry Potter. I finished reading this series right at the beginning of my booktube time, so it's about 2 years ago I was reading this series for the very first time. So I read it for the first time as an adult, and I can see why so many people, especially if you read it as a child or like teen, whatever, why this series would stick with you. There's a lot to it, but in some ways also it's like kind of just average. I probably shouldn't say that because so many of you put this on your favorites list. You might not appreciate that, but yeah, Harry Potter. I feel like if you haven't read it, you should probably read it just so that you get the references, but if you really don't want to, I'm not going to force you to. Coming in at number 8 is another one that I read in high school and have not read since and would really like to, and that is The Hobbit. I have these like cool leather-like editions. I've got The Hobbit and the entire Lord of the Rings in this series, like this set. So I read The Hobbit in grade 11 or grade 12 and really enjoyed it. I found myself like thinking in the language of how Tolkien wrote this. Yeah, so we follow Bilbo as he goes on a journey with a bunch of dwarves, and I don't actually remember a ton. Oh, this one has illustrations. Not that that's the best illustration ever, but that's cool. So I read The Lord of the Rings about 2 years ago as well, but yeah, I haven't read this one for like 20 years. So would be interested in rereading that one. The one in the next spot is another one that I've read and don't own, and I really enjoyed this one at the time, but I don't know if I would really enjoy it now, and that is The Nightingale. This is a historical fiction story set in World War II, and it's different than a lot of historical fiction books. I think there's some parts that were a little bit different. In some ways it felt kind of the same. Maybe I've read too much World War II historical fiction. I'm not sure. We know that historical fiction is not my genre. But there was some things that really intrigued me about this. We pretty much follow two sisters, and they kind of go on live different lives, and so their time during World War II, they're set in France or live in France. They have very different experiences with the war. And one of the things that I appreciated about this book is it really made me think about the Germans that didn't really want to be fighting the war, because we have this general idea that like the Germans were all bad, you know, but that's not necessarily the case. Like there were people that were doing what they had to do, what they were told to do, and so I did appreciate that about the book, but there were lots of things about it that I didn't really like. Yeah, so that's that one. Next up is one of my favorite authors, and this is Mistborn. I was actually surprised. This was the only Sanderson book or series that ended up on this list. So this is I don't know, is this an adult fantasy? It kind of almost reads like YA, but I don't know if it's actually, I think it might be just adult fantasy. And this is in a world where people can control different metals. Okay, interrupted by the toddler. So people can control different metals, certain people, And our main character, her name is Vin, and Sanderson often writes very feisty female characters. I really think he does such a great job writing his female characters. So I really enjoyed reading about her. Yeah, I feel like I went into this book quite blind and would like to reread it now, knowing the story. I definitely liked book 1 more than the rest of the trilogy, but this was kind of my first introduction to Sanderson fantasy, and I think he does a really good job with it. And then another one that I've read that I don't own is A Man Called Uva. I listened to this one on audio, and that's how they pronounce the name on audio. It's spelled O-V-E, and every time I watch a video of someone talking about it, everyone pronounces it wrong, or not wrong necessarily, but different than how the audiobook pronounced it. So I'm going with Uva. So this is pretty much about a cantankerous old man who pretty much the entire book he just tries to commit suicide, but his neighbors keep interfering. And yeah, I actually really enjoyed the book. It made me realize how much of a role we can play in the lives of our neighbors. I'm pretty sure that's not really what Bachman was going for. I don't know what his goal was with the book. But I learned a lot about being a good neighbor from the book. Yeah, so even though our main character wasn't really very likable, I really enjoyed it, and to me characters mean a lot. So I feel like that's saying a lot about Bachman's writing, but that is one of the only Bachman books that I've actually enjoyed. Okay, now I own the last 4 here. So now we are in the final ones. Coming in at spot number 4 is a favorite of mine, and I have this beautiful copy, and that is Little Women. So we follow Meg, Beth, Jo, and what's the other sister's name? I should probably know their names. Meg, who's next? Amy. Amy's the little one. Okay. Meg, Beth, Jo, and Amy. And we pretty much just follow them over the course of a few years. Their dad is serving in the war, so it's just them and their mom. And our main character, Jo, she's definitely a tomboy, and she wants to be a writer. And yeah, I feel like lots happens in this book, but it takes a long time for it to happen. I remember reading this in high school. It had to have been before grade 12, because we moved at the end of grade 11, and it was definitely in my previous house. But I remember when something happened, someone died, I'll say that. I was so shocked that the author did that, and I don't know, it just made the book stick with me so much. Yeah, so I've read this a couple of times, plan on continuing to reread it on a regular basis. Coming in at spot number 3 is another one that a lot of you have read because of me, and that is Mark of the Raven and this trilogy by Morgan L. Bussey. Thank you to Holly for finding out from the author herself how to actually pronounce this name, because I think we've been pronouncing it like a French way, but Bussey. So this is a Christian fantasy series where our main character is part of this House Ravenwood, where they have the power to dream walk, so they can enter people's dreams, and her family has been using this power to assassinate people, and she's not really down with that. She's not really wanting to be an assassin, so yeah, this book takes place. I do like main characters that are willing to rebel against the expectations, especially when the expectations are assassination. So I really liked her in this book. And yeah, if you haven't read this one, highly recommend it. Spot number 2, I'm so glad that this one made the list. And this is Anne of Green Gables. I thought I would pull out a different edition since I'm always raving about the Tundra editions. This one has pink. Yeah, so Anne, if you've been around here for any the last month, or you guys, this fly is still in my office. Every time I stop filming, I can't find it, and I get out the camera and here it is. It's torture. Yeah, so I'm currently reading the series, loving it, and I feel like so far it just gets better and better. If you've read Anne of Green Gables and were kind of on the fence or thought it was kind of mediocre, please continue on because it gets better. I like Anne as an orphan. In this book, she's pretty spunky, and I don't know, just she's what, 11 or 12 or 13 or something. She's kind of just coming into herself and learning who she is, but I feel like she really develops as a character as time goes on, and I like finding throughout this book how she finds a home and feels loved for the first time. So I appreciate that. And you guys, the final book is one that I have read. I started to read once and then I didn't get into it. And then I read it once and I really liked it. Then I read it again and I didn't like it. So I do not know how I feel about this book. And that is Pride and Prejudice. Yeah, I don't think I need to give a synopsis of this book because almost everyone knows about it. But because of You've Got Mail, I really want to love this book and I don't. So it's another one that I plan on rereading. I'm pretty much going to reread this until I like it. I read Emma shortly after this one and liked that one a lot better. But I'm determined to enjoy, if not even love, Pride and Prejudice. So if you are one of the people that love it, like this one got the most votes, this was the most well-loved books from you guys. Like, what is it that you love about this book? Maybe let me know so that I can find those things too and love it just as much as you. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the top 15 of your guys' favorite books. That was really interesting to me. Some of them were expected and some of them were not. So I had a lot of fun with that. And like I said, every book that I have not read from this list, I plan on putting on my have to read in 2022 list. And some of these that I have read, I'm going to reread. And yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts and opinions. If you did not fill out my survey and tell me your favorite book, or if you couldn't just pick one, your favorite 2 books, leave a comment below and tell me your favorite 1 or 2 books. I am thankful that no one made me do it because I don't know if I could pick 1 or 2. So I didn't have to do that. So thanks for watching, guys.